So I'm Veronica. Like he said, I'm a graduate student pursuing my PhD right now in neuroscience, so I study the brain. And so today, I'm going to talk to you guys about the human brain and give you a brief introduction to the prefrontal cortex, which is in the front of your brain behind your forehead, and is what I study in my lab. So before getting into the brain, I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about why I got interested in it and why I decided to become a scientist. So like Sharif alluded to, I grew up in Seattle, and I grew up with parents that really loved to do things outdoors. So when I was a kid, we spent a lot of time outside doing lots of fun things. And also that meant that in the summers, while my parents were working, I got signed up for things like the Seattle Audubon Society Nature Camp, where we walked around and looked at bugs and explored areas in Seattle. In high school, I continued being interested in things about the outdoors and about different animals, and ended up being a teen volunteer at the Seattle Aquarium. And so this meant that I got to be there for free all day on weekends and talk to guests that came into the aquarium and explain different things about the animals and exhibits we had there. This also meant that I got to go on some fun adventures to do counts of different animal species in the Pacific Northwest and get an idea of sort of biodiversity and different marine life. In college, I was still interested in animals and behavior, and trying to get sort of a feel for lots of different fields of science. And this led to lots of different opportunities, but one of them was getting to go on this adventure. This is me in this weird straw hat. A trip to Borneo where we did some observations of animals in the wild. So these are one species of monkey, and these are orangutans here. And sort of looking at different animal species to see how healthy a cluster of forest or region of land was. So all of these things, the sort of underlying thing that tied all these experiences together for me, which I realized when I was in college, was an interest in behavior. So why humans and other animals behaved in certain ways and how they sort of adapted to their environments to behave differently and survive. So this led me to study the human brain. So this is a brain, one that looks somewhat similar to this is inside your head right now. It looks kind of like old Play-Doh or like, kind of weird Jell-O or pudding, but it's what makes you you. And one of the things that's sort of interesting about the human brain that you can see really quickly from this photo is that the human brain is covered in all of these sort of wrinkles and folds and valleys. And the reason for this is sort of a fun adaptation that biology has done to conserve size and sort of cram more into your head. So I'm just going to, ooh, that's really loud. So just as an example to give you kind of an understanding of what this means, so if you took this wrinkled surface of your brain and stretched it all out flat, it would be about the size of this piece of newspaper, which is really big and doesn't fit inside your head very well. But if you take this flat sheet of cells and crumple it up on itself and fold it up, it becomes a lot smaller, and this would fit inside your skull a lot better. So biology has sort of adapted this idea to cram a lot more cells and tissue inside your head to be able to do more things without your head being, as large as a beach ball. So this sort of wrinkled, layered surface that sits on the outside of your brain is called the gray matter of your brain. And it's called this because it houses all of the cells, the cell bodies for this outer region. And so what that means is that there's all these different distinct layers of neurons or cells in your brain. And so these are their bodies where all the things like mitochondria and the nucleus sit. If you've taken any cell biology classes. And so all of these different layers are what sits just inside this tiny little gray wedge that's that folded bit that sits on the outside. And then there's this white matter underneath all of that, which is the connections between different brain regions. So when a neuron in one part of your brain wants to talk to a neuron in another part of your brain, it sends this long signal through the under part of your brain to be able to signal from one area to another. And this part of your brain is called your white matter because it's a lot later. And it's called white matter because it's insulated. So you can think of this as sort of being an insulated phone cord for one region of the brain to send this long connected signal to another region. And so this wrinkled surface of your brain is called your cortex. And the cortex can be broken up into a bunch of different lobes that have different primary functions. And so this blue region in the back here is your occipital lobe, and this part of your brain is really critical for processing visual information. So when your eyes are looking at things and receiving light signals, all of that gets sent back to this part of your brain here, and that helps you detect, what's blue, what's a shadow, what's near, and what's far. And then this part of the brain sends up signals to other regions to use that information for lots of different things. This region here is your parietal lobe, which sits kind of in the top back part of your head. And this part is critical for a few different things. One of them is processing somatosensory information, so that means other sensory signals you get from your body that aren't vision, so things like touch, pressure, texture, all of that gets sent here. And this part of the brain is also critical for integrating different pieces of information. So it can help combine different pieces of information that come in from your body and your senses and make sort of a more compact signal to then send that more compact piece of information to other parts of your brain to then use it for things like decision making or other behaviors that we do. This pink part here is your temporal lobe, which sits behind your ears on the side of your head. And this part's really, really critical for long-term memory. It also helps us, based on our memories and experiences, identify what things are. And then the frontal lobe, which is what I study in my lab. So this region in the front of your brain is very large in the human brain, and it can be split up into two main parts. So one is involved in motor planning and sort of executing motor movements, and then the prefrontal cortex is involved in a lot of aspects of cognitive things, cognitive functions. So this can be things like decision making, planning for the future, sort of flexible and adaptive behavior, impulse control and inhibition, and something called working memory, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. So this region here is your prefrontal cortex and sits behind your forehead and your eyes. And is one of the last to have developed through evolution. So a rat has a really little baby frontal cortex. A cat has a more of a region that can actually be called frontal cortex. A monkey has a very distinct prefrontal cortex, similar to humans, but ours is much larger. And so not only is this part of your brain one of the last to have evolved through different species, it's also one of the last finished developing in us. So as you grow up, your brain grows up with you and develops and then matures, and the prefrontal cortex is one of the last regions to finish that maturation, to finish fully developing and being stable. And so this is kind of a complex figure, but what the idea is generally is that one way we can tell when your brain is mature is by taking humans at different ages, and then we bring them into the lab and we put them in a scanning machine, and that can tell us the thickness and a lot of other pieces of information about different parts of your brain. And so what we can do with that is that we know one of the things that happens during development in your brain is that when you're younger and your cells and your all of your experiences, you're sort of trying to figure out what are the most important things for your brain to be able to do for you to help you adapt the best to your specific environment. And so the cells in your brain are going to send out lots and lots of signals and connect to lots and lots of other cells and receive lots and lots of other connections. And then as you develop, what your brain does is actually start to prune some of those connections to pick out the ones that are the most important for you and strengthen those connections. So actually, as different regions of your brain mature, it means that little thin wedge of gray matter thins a little bit. And so once that thinning is done, that means that part of your brain has matured. And so that's what this figure is showing. So when we put kids in the scanner when they're 5, this is that prefrontal part of your brain here, which is the same this region up here. And you can see that as the colors get darker and closer to purple and blues, that means they're more mature. And so as these kids age and coming back in and getting scans at different ages, by the time they were 20, you can see that this prefrontal region is still sort of just at that finishing stage of maturation. Okay, so how do we know what the prefrontal cortex does? One of the ways that we sort of study different functions of your brain and of your prefrontal cortex is by having the same way where we bring people into the lab and scan them at different stages, different ages. We can also do the same thing for different tests and figure out at what age the ability to do different things sort of finishes developing or maturing. And so one of the things we can do to test prefrontal function is to look at impulse control and inhibition. So some of you may have heard about this marshmallow test. But the idea for the marshmallow test is that we can bring kids into the lab and we sit them down at a table with an experimenter and we put one very large, tasty, sugared marshmallow in front of them. And then the experimenter will say to these kids, okay, you can either eat your marshmallow right now, or if you wait 20 minutes until I come back, I'm going to bring back a second marshmallow and you can have 2. Okay, so the idea is whether or not you can wait for that second marshmallow or you just want to eat the one and have it right away. And so when kids are doing this in the lab, at different ages, when they're younger, it's a lot harder for kids to do this. It's a real struggle to wait those 20 minutes for that second marshmallow. Some are a lot better at it than others. Some don't even bother and just throw the first marshmallow right in their mouth if they don't want to wait. But one of the interesting things is that we can watch this get easier for kids as they get older. And your ability to sort of inhibit or stop this sort of impulsive desire to eat that marshmallow, to be able to wait for a larger, bigger reward, helps or matches onto other behavior traits that are important for our functioning in society. So the kids in this particular first study that did this test, the ones that were able to wait longer when they were followed up again many years later were found to have higher SAT scores, lower BMI, lower body weight, and had better coping skills in situations of high stress and frustration. So another thing that you can think about as an example for a trait that you might require this behavior for, so inhibiting something that you sort of reflexively want to do, is this fun card game called Stopjack. Has anyone played this before? Yeah, okay. So for those of you that haven't, the idea is you split up a deck of cards evenly between all the players, and then everyone takes a turn flipping over a card into the middle pile, and anytime a jack appears on that pile, then you want to be the first and the fastest to slap the pile, and you get all those cards. But if you slap for any card that's not a jack, then there's sort of a negative consequence for that, and you have to stick some of your own cards under the pile and you lose some of them. So you want to be really reflexive and fast with this, which is sort of this yes-go idea, but then when it's not a jack, then you want to inhibit that reflexive action in order to not lose some of your cards. So we're going to do a quick inhibition test. Is everyone ready? So what's going to happen is there's going to be a box on the screen like this, and sometimes this box is going to turn green. When the box turns green, I want everyone to clap. Okay? So get your hands out. But sometimes the box is going to turn red. When the box turns red, don't clap. Okay? That's when you're inhibiting the clap. Everyone ready? Does that make sense? Yep. Good? Okay, here we go. Nice. Good job, guys. Okay, so that was a pretty, basic level inhibiting action. So I'm just going to make it a little bit more difficult for you guys, okay? So now there's still going to be this green go signal, but now sometimes the box is going to turn this pattern green, and this time, this pattern green is when you don't clap, okay? So we're just going to see if you guys can up the intensity. Ready? Nice. Good job, you guys. Okay, so one of the ways we can understand what parts of your brain are critical for this is to have people come in and be in this scanning machine while they're doing tasks like this. So different behaviors let us know, what age these things sort of mature and develop, but we can also understand which parts of the brain are really, really critical by having people come in and do tests like this while their brains are being scanned. And so from this, we know that this part of your prefrontal cortex, it's sort of on the lower region and sort of inside, is really important for this inhibition and blocking impulsivity. And another region of your brain that's really critical for a lot of cognitive functions is this region here, which is the dorsolateral or prefrontal cortex. So this is on the outside and upper edge of your brain, of your cortex. And this region is really critical for something called working memory. And so what working memory is really, really short-term memory. So you can think of it as sort of holding one or a few pieces of information in mind in order to immediately use that information for something that you're doing. So this can be, remembering the digits of a phone number long enough to dial them or write them down, or if anyone remembers this game, Simon, where the game lights up a random series of these lighted pieces, and then when it stops, you have to repeat that same random sequence in the same order in order to sort of win your turn and continue playing the game. Now, this can also be something that's, just like sitting on your couch watching TV and a commercial comes on and you get up and walk into the kitchen and you get there and you're trying to remember why you came to the kitchen. So it's sort of holding information in mind that you need to use right away. And so from putting people in the scanner doing these sorts of tasks, we know that this dorsal side region is really critical for this. So in the spirit of Science Cafe, we're also going to do a fun working memory test. Everyone ready? You guys are kind of amped up already from the Impulsivity Test. So for this one, what's going to happen is there's going to be this square on the screen, and different letters are going to appear inside this square one at a time. And what you have to do is look at the letter on the screen and clap every time the current letter on the screen matches the letter that came two before it. Okay?
Okay.
So if a sequence appears like this, it would come up one at a time, then you would clap for I and W, okay? Because I matches what came two before,
And also,
W matches what came two before.
sorry. For a second, I thought you clapped for Keeler, but wait, that's two.
Yeah. For this one, it's what came two before, okay? Everyone ready? Here we go. Okay, nice job, you guys. So that seemed pretty easy. Most of you could get that. So naturally, we're going to make it a little harder. Okay. So this time you do want to clap for the cue. Okay. So if a sequence of letters appears, we're doing now because there's going to be letters appearing one at a time the same way. But this time, what you have to do is clap anytime the letter matches the one that came three before it. Okay. This is hard, you guys. So everyone stay focused. So if the cue appears, you're clapping here because another cue came three letters before. Does it make sense? Everyone ready? Okay, here we go. Okay, good job. It's hard. It's really hard. You guys can do that. So doing tests like this help us understand which parts of the brain are critical for which things, but they also help us understand what might be going wrong in different disorders that have deficits in different cognitive functions. And so working memory is one of those things that can have a deficit in certain disorders. And this is one of the things that I study in my lab. So this is me being a scientist in the lab. And so what my lab studies is this region of brain that's important for working memory. And we're interested in that chunk of gray matter and one of those layers and the cells in that layer that connect with one another and are really critical for this behavior, for working memory. And we want to understand how these cells communicate with one another to allow for this, and also how it might be sort of going awry in different disorders to help us understand conditions that humans suffer from. So today I hope I've convinced you that this is you, that you're your brain. And with that, I'll take any questions.
So Veronica has time for one question.
Yeah.
So how does the prefrontal cortex differ between patients that might have Alzheimer's or
Yeah, there's different ways that the prefrontal cortex can be sort of going awry in different disorders, right? So we can understand some of that by looking at tissue, brain tissue from patients after they've died naturally, and then we look at that and sort of understand, how, if there's a particular type of cell that's lost, or one region is really more affected than another. So we can do it that way. We can also scan patients. So one of the ways we know that this region is sort of not functioning properly in a condition like schizophrenia is because when we have patients come in and do these same tests in a scanner, then they show a lower activation of that region. So there's a few different ways we can try and understand what's going wrong and then use that to help us influence what to look for. Yeah.
Let's thank Veronica again.
Thanks.